Here we go. Thank you.
Got it.
Amazing.
Welcome, everybody.
Hi. It's so nice to see everyone. And it's such a fun adventure to be with a group of people for Torah study that I don't know, because I spend a lot of time teaching people who I spend a lot of time with. And this is really cool to get to see all of you. By way of introduction, I am Rabbi Emily Hyatt. I am one of the clergy at Temple Emmanuel in Denver. And I think just to take a quick second, because I think it's really important to know who you learn from, and what my context is, and, not the whole bio, God forbid, but just to give you the quick and important pieces of the puzzle. I'm a Denver native, born and raised. I went to preschool here at Temple Emmanuel, which is my claim to fame around here. And I'm so glad to be back in Denver, even though I've been back for almost 6 years. I still I don't take it for granted. I didn't grow up in the Reform movement. I grew up more conservative, traditional, lean conservadox-ish, did the whole thing where everybody has their own sort of Jewish journey and explores all kinds of different parts of identity and practice and all of that. It took me a little while to decide to become a rabbi, mostly because I didn't grow up with female rabbis that resonated with me. So it kind of never occurred to me. But eventually I got on board and figured it out. And I'm so glad that I did, because I really love it and appreciate it. I also never intended to be a congregational rabbi, but here we are, because life throws all kinds of fun adventures and paths at you. I think one of my favorite parts of my job right now, although I'll tell you in this particular moment, it is a bit of a challenge and something I never expected to be doing, is that I also serve as the president of the Rocky Mountain Rabbis and Cantors. And I'm about 18 months into that role. It's like the, sort of terrible when we're in a hard time as a community, but also feels really important to be gathering at least our clergy in the community together and being with them. So that has been a powerful part of my job, if not an easy one recently. I have a 7-year-old, and I think a lot about all of the things that I teach and learn through the lens of my own life, as I think we all do all the time. So a lot of my perspective, changes as he grows, that sort of shifts the way that I understand the world. As we always do, right? When we learn and change and grow as people. And I'm a single mom, so it's just the two of us. And that also, I think, impacts a lot of the way that I see the world and Jewish community and my role in it. So with that, we'll go ahead and kick ourselves off.
And he's another Neil, right?
And he's another Neil. He spells it differently, but we're not going to hold it against anybody. It doesn't matter. But he's like the youngest Neil I've ever met, and I named him, but still, it's a good name. Okay, so this week's Torah portion is Vayera, and from what I understand of this crew, this is a crew of wonderful people that has varying degrees of Torah study experience. And I think that's awesome. That is also what it feels like to teach here at Temple Emmanuel. So I think that's wonderful. A couple of just quick sort of class, not even expectations, but just sort of like norms, maybe, if you will, just so that everybody feels comfortable, since you do get to learn with different teachers. I'm so happy for you to ask questions, to interrupt, to raise your hand, to in Zoom hand, real hand, whichever hand you want to raise is totally fine with me. If you want to put things in the chat, that's great. I do keep my eye on it as we go. I am going to use a text that I'm going to share that I have prepared. I'm going to share my screen with you. If anybody is having trouble seeing it, because it's not zoomed in enough, just let me know. I can always send it to you. I can zoom in, all of those things, but please don't suffer in silence because your screen is a different size than mine. I think that's it. And if there's something that I say, my goal is always to make sure that I am not using language that doesn't make sense either in Hebrew and English, or English without translating it. But if I do say something and you need some context, raise the flag, gesticulate wildly, and we'll go back. This week's Torah portion is Vayera. We are, I think, in the 4th Torah portion of the Torah, which is always fun when we get to start again at the beginning, which we did recently. If you have been a little bit of time since you have gathered for Torah study as this community, just a reminder, one of the crazy things that we do, the Jews, is that we freaking do it again every year. So about a month ago, we hit Simchat Torah, which is the holiday at which we end the Torah, and then we just started over again, which is pretty cool and a pretty neat thing for us to do, because as we grow and change, and as the world that we live in changes, it certainly changes our perspective. And so every time we read it, I have to imagine that we are reading it differently and through different eyes and a different lens and a different world view. So far in the Torah, because we're only, this is only Parsha number 4, we had creation, Adam and Eve, the whole Garden of Eden drama series. We had Cain and Abel. That didn't end well. And then we got to Noah, right? The story of Noah in the 2nd week. And that also didn't go so well. It's hard to make people and give them all of the brains and the capacities that we give to people and then expect them to behave in the way, I don't know, that we might expect or want of them. So then there's this big flood, right? And God starts over. And then last week in the Torah portion, it was Lech Lecha, where we are introduced to Abraham, who is our first real character. And even though we sort of know Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, Abraham sticks around, right? We don't talk about our matriarchs and patriarchs as including Adam and Eve, which is interesting. We really start with Abraham and Sarah. So this is the beginning of the story of our people as the Jewish community and as those people that have sort of set the lineage for it. So many things happen in this Torah portion. I sort of never really can wrap my head around all of the pieces of the puzzle. So just bullet points, and then we'll get into some of the text. Abraham and Sarah are hanging out in their tent, if you'll recall. Abraham welcomes 3 visitors to the tent. And so we have our first theme of the Torah portion, which is hospitality, right? Because if you'll recall, one of the weird parts of this Torah portion is that Abraham is sitting at the tent, and actually I'll share my screen and we can, hold on one second, give me one hot second, and we can take a little look at the text here. I'm just on a Sefaria. Oh, no, hold on. It didn't. It's the best thing ever that it shows you now what you're sharing. Okay, so this is the Sefaria page, which is a website that has all of the text on it. And this is the beginning of Vayera, which is chapter 18. And so it says, God appeared to Abraham by the terebinths of Mamre, and he was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. But if we scroll back for just a hot second, just one little second, we go back, we read the very end of Parshat Lech Lecha, we are reminded what happens at the end, which is that Abraham and his son Ishmael are circumcised. And Abraham is 99 years old, and he circumcises himself, because that sounds super fun and also probably, like, I don't know, medically unsound, but it's fine. It was a long time ago. And his son Ishmael, and then all of the men of the households and all of those things. And then we don't imagine or assume that any time actually passes meaningfully here. We just know that Abraham is sitting in his tent, and probably like they don't have a whole lot of Advil, right? He is in great pain, I would imagine. And he's just hanging there. And he's sitting at the entrance of this tent as the day grows hot, and 3 figures are suddenly there. So that's where we start. Okay. And so the first thing that happens is that those people are very welcomed into the tent. Abraham takes great care of them. He brings them all the things. He washes their feet. He does all of the like amazing hospitality things that a person might do if they're in great pain and sitting in a hot tent, which just is one of those things that tells us about what kind of guy Abraham is. And these 3 figures, strangers, men, right? The word in Hebrew is anashim, which is like people, dudes, but we translate that strategically because what we learn is that actually they are messengers from God. That is what our tradition teaches us. And what they actually did was come to tell Abraham and Sarah that they are going to have a kiddo, which is great because they are really old and they have not been able to conceive. And that is a part of their story, is sort of the drama of this infertility that plagues Sarah for the first 100 years of her life, 90 years of her life. Okay. So what happens is that they tell Sarah that she's going to have a baby. Sarah laughs. But it turns out that like that is happening. The next thing that happens in this story is that the angels, messengers, men, people, they start to leave from the tent, and they walk out by way of Sodom and Gomorrah. So then it's going to get really exciting and uplifting from there. And what we know is that in this particular place in Sodom, which is the name of the city, there is some stuff happening. And what it says in our text is that there is grave sin. Okay, so all kinds of sages have all kinds of things to say about what is going on there and why that is. We may or may not come back to that. But essentially, this is the part where Abraham gets into an argument with God about destroying the city because the stuff that's going on in the city. And Abraham, right, this story about like Abraham says, well, what if there's 50 innocent people that live there? Are you just going to destroy them all because the rest of the population is wicked, is sinning, is not acting in the way that you want? Isn't it weird when Torah from so long ago reflects questions that we're asking today, even in different contexts, but like that's not such a, I don't know, far away question from us, which is how do you handle the innocence of certain people when you are dealing with the guilt of others? Okay, so Abraham essentially negotiates with God. What if there's 40? What if there's 30? What if there's 10? And what are we going to do? So Abraham and God have this whole negotiation, and then the messengers arrive in Sodom, and Lot is sitting in the gate of the city. And Lot was like, hello, and rises to greet the people that are there, the messengers that are coming. And essentially, there's the strangers now that are in Lot's house. The people of Sodom don't know what to do with strangers, so they attack Lot's house. Lot and his 2 daughters and his wife start to escape the city as God is like, yep, this is what we were talking about. I'm destroying the cities. And the instruction is giving, don't turn around, don't look back. And Lot's wife looks back and she turns into a pillar of salt. And then we get to some interesting stuff in the middle of the story, which feels out of step with the way that we understand our world today, but is probably not quite as weird in that time, which is that Lot continues the line of his family, but with his daughters. What a strange decision that is. But when they bear children, there are new nations that are formed from that, which is both a not that important, but also like not worth, right? We don't need to just skip over the hard parts. We just maybe acknowledge it, decide whether we're going to tackle it or not. In our text, and then we move on to the next part of the story, in which Abraham again has an interaction with a foreign sort of experience. The first one happened last week, this one, and Sarah is traveling with him. He says that she is his sister. That happens twice in our text. And then Isaac is born. He is circumcised. He grows up just a little bit. And we remember that last Parsha, Abraham took Hagar, who is Sarah's maidservant, to be one of his wives and to bear children. Since Sarah wasn't having children, Hagar has Ishmael, who is at least 13 because he was circumcised at 13 in the last Torah portion, right at the end when we were reading. So Hagar and Ishmael are living amongst Sarah and Isaac and Abraham. And Sarah's very jealous. She does not like that there is another son. She does not like anything about it. She asks Abraham to send them away. Abraham does so. They are sent away into the wilderness. Sarah thinks that her son is going to die because they're wandering in the wilderness. We're going to talk about that for sure. And then we get to the binding of Isaac, as if that wasn't enough. I mean, I can't believe I'm like still talking about what happens in the Parsha. Then we get to the binding of Isaac, and God says, take your son, your only son, the one whom you love, and sacrifice him. They go, they walk, they do the thing, they find the spot. Abraham's holding the knife. There's a ram. It's caught in the thicket. Abraham is like, oh, thank God. I'm going to sacrifice the ram instead. Isaac survives. Okay. And then that's it. It's okay, because like, God forbid we should have any more giant dramatic parts of this story. So all of that is to say, there is this one fascinating thing that actually takes us all the way through this Parsha. And it is, quite frankly, the name of our Parsha. The name of our Parsha, which starts at chapter 18, verse 1, right here. You should be able to see this PDF, and I'm going to zoom in once I remember how, just a little bit. And so the very first part of this Parsha is Vayera. And we know that every Torah portion, fun fact in case this is new to you, every Torah portion is named for the first unique word that is in it. Okay, so that is often not the first word, because a lot of Torah portions start with the same line, which is, and God said to Moses. So we would have like 82 parshas. There's not even 82 that are named, and God said. So it's the first unique word that comes up in the parsha that has not been used before. In this case, it happens to be the first word of the parsha, which is Vayera, which is translated here as God appeared, right? Vayera elav Adonai, God appeared to him. And so appeared, right, is one of these sort of interestingly conjugated words that comes from the root word to see, okay? And fascinatingly, in all of the many stories, and quite frankly, a little bit of chaos that happens in this parsha, this word pops up over and over and over and over again, which is not, by the way, how we name a Torah portion. It is not based on the frequency of a word or a word form or a verb that appears in the parsha. That is nothing. It really is like the rabbis went through and they were like, oh, we haven't said that one yet. There you go, right? Bereshit is the first word in the book of Genesis, so it's the first Torah portion in Genesis. Wow, what an interesting choice that we have lawnmowers here today. They're very loud. Tell me if you can hear them, and I'll put a headphone in so you can hear me closer to a microphone. So here we are thinking now about the word, which is coincidental, but then at how many times this idea and this concept shows up. And one of the things that I often do in Torah study is exactly this, because I really like words. I like them in Hebrew. I like them in English. I like them in a box with a fox. I will eat them with locks. I don't know. I think that words, I don't think that they're designed intentionally to tell us secret meaning that is supposed to be there, right? It's not that this was the intention. If we only look for it, we unearth secret codes. I think that what words give us the opportunity to do is one of the many lenses in to what a Torah portion might have to teach us if we look at it a certain way. A quick pause for context before we get into our word here. One of the things that I think is pretty cool about the Torah is in general is if you've ever seen a Torah scroll, it's pretty crazy object, right? It is written by hand on parchment, which is treated animal skin using a quill and ink, turkey feathers in particular, because why not? And every Torah is written exactly the same way. There are very specific rules that apply to the scribe who writes a Torah. And a couple of those rules are, number one, that they have to write every word with intention. So I really like to do calligraphy. It's like one of my like happy zone out things to do. I'm not that good at it, but I like to pretend to be. And one of the things that I really like to do is like, you know, doodle or do art or whatever when I'm like watching TV or listening to an audio book or something like that. Scribes, they have to be paying attention with intention to every single word that they write in the Torah. And second rule, every single letter, not just every word, but every single letter has to be correct and accurate in every single Torah scroll in order for it to be sort of checked and in good condition for use. There are 304,805 letters in the Torah. That's a lot. 304,805 letters in every single Torah that have to be accurate, that have to be legible, that have to be written with intention. Why do we have these rules? Because, by the way, what a stressful job then to be a scribe, right? Like there's no like listening to Taylor Swift and like, doing your job while you're like getting, your calligraphy done. You're focused. And so the idea behind that, and what I think is so cool about that, is the knowledge and the confidence that we have that all 304,805 of those letters are the exact same letters that have been in that Torah since we can trace back. The words don't change. That's cool. And what it reminds us is that it's the exact same tradition in every generation. It is the exact same language in every generation. And what is not the same is what we read into it and how we understand it and how we interpret it through our own eyes and our own lenses, because that is what changes. And I think if both of those pieces could change, we wouldn't have the transmission that we have. But because, oh my God, it's the leaf, you can't see what's going on. It's the leaf blowers are here. But because it is not both pieces, right? The text itself doesn't change, but we do. If both of them were flexible or malleable, we wouldn't be able to transmit our tradition the way that we do. But because one of it stays the same, we get to dig in and know that we're going to look at it this way this time. So this time and this way, we're going to look at it through the word that appears over and over and over again. So the very beginning, right? Abraham is sitting in the tent. Can you still hear me? Can you hear the guys? It's so loud.
No, we don't hear them, Rabbi Hyatt.
Okay, perfect. I'll stop asking you then, because I can hear myself talk, so it's fine. So Abraham is sitting in the tent and God appears. And there's our first word, our first use here of this word, Vayera. And then in the very next verse, we see two phrases or two pieces of this that we're going to see again. And it starts out the second verse, Genesis 18:2. It says, Vayisa einav. Vayisa einav means God, and he lifted. Yisa is to lift. Einav, ayin, is an eye. So he lifted up his eyes, which means he looked up, right? If I'm sitting like this and I look up, I've lifted my eyes, Vayar, and saw that there were dudes standing at the entrance to the tent. And so he runs to go and see them. But it actually, there's one more in this very same verse. As soon as he saw them, Vayar Vegaratz, he got up and he ran. He saw them and he ran. So far, we're at our second verse, and we have three of the same words. Vayera, Vayar, Vayar. Okay. And then the whole thing happens with the guys, and we don't see the word again for a couple of minutes until the messengers are about to leave. So the angels have come, and now the angels are going to go. And it's chapter 18, verse 16. And actually, this time we're going to see a different word. So we're just going to keep track, right? And so what happens, the messengers, the men, they set out from there. And what happens? Vayashkifu al Panei Sodom. They look down as they're walking out of the tent. They look down at the city of Sodom, but they look, right? So part of what we're doing is seeing what is the root of the word that is translated in a way that makes us understand that somebody is visually perceiving something. So here it's Vayashkifu, that they look down at Sodom. So now we're in 16 verses in, and we're seeing something else.
Rabbi,
and then
can I ask a quick question?
Yes, of course.
I'm wondering if, do you read into the fact that he looked up versus looking down? Was that intentional? I know you were saying that sometimes words, a cigar is just a cigar, but in this case, is it looking up at the three men versus looking down on Sodom?
I love that. Absolutely. Yes, because why, right? Like the answer to that is never no. That is a thing that I didn't notice when I was looking at this or thinking about this, but the difference between, right? When you're looking down, right? If you've ever done any active listening, leadership training, human connection, whatever it is, if I'm looking down and I'm not looking at you, we're not being in contact with each other as humans, right? Or making that kind of like person to person connection. So looking down is an expression also that we use in English, right? That you are maybe judging someone, right? It is disconnected, it's cut off, it is separate, it is perhaps even judgmental. Looking up, we see each other in the eyes, we're making connection, we are open, right? And receptive, and it's a whole different feeling. That thing is that, yeah, absolutely. I love that. So let's see what, right? Like put that in your head and see where that takes us. The word here that we use also it's translated in the text that I'm using as gazed, as looked, but actually it is often used as to mean gaze, right? To gaze upon something. And I don't know what the difference is in English between to look and to gaze, but maybe we'll come back to it and see if we can find some meaning in here, because I think it's really fascinating that it's a different word. So keep all of these things. And yes, keep asking when you notice those things. Those are brilliant. So then we keep going. The people who are at the entrance of the house. So this one doesn't have a word in it, but I put it in because I thought it was fascinating given what we're talking about. So remember that they go to Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham fights. There's a whole thing about like, how many innocent people are we going to save? And then when the messengers are in Lot's house and all the people are like, who are the strangers? We hate strangers. Let's, I don't know, be an angry mob. The people who are at the entrance of the house, they are the angry mob, young and old. The beginning of the destruction, right? And this sort of punishment that comes is that they are struck with blinding light. So the beginning of the consequence of the destruction of this, like, you are not doing the right thing, people in this city, you are steeped in sin, whatever we want to make of that. But the beginning of the consequence is that their sight is cut off. Right? So if we have a theme going here, which I have decided we do and made you talk about, right? I've identified a theme that we're going to pull through because there's probably a million of them. Our theme is sight or looking, and the punishment here is the removal or being cut off from the ability to do that, to look, to gaze, to see, whatever that might be. Fascinating. And then we get to, so Sodom and Gomorrah has all the different words, which is really interesting. And then the very next part of the story, Lot and his family are leaving, and the instructions are flee for your life, run for your lives, right? And don't turn around and don't look back. Whatever you do, don't pay attention to what's going on behind you. Pay attention to what's going on in front of you. The al-tabit is the word that is used here. So we've got a third word. And tabit is often translated to glance, right? To glance. So now we've got to look, to lift our eyes, to gaze, and to glance. I don't know. We're going to take this apart. We're going to keep going with it. My gut here is that gaze is an individual experience, right? If I gaze upon something, I am looking at it. If I glance at something, I'm not even paying that much attention to it. I am just, right, sort of like, oh, right, I'm just sort of like taking in the information maybe as minimally as I can. It's a brief, I don't know, it's a short look, right? And what happens? Lot's wife looks back. Whoops, she turns into salt. Same word, v'tabet, right? And these are just Hebrew verbs that are being conjugated in different ways. But we can see that they have similar roots, right? Al tabit, don't glance, v'tabet, and she glanced, and then she turned into salt. And then we're coming out of this story. We're coming back out of this, right? Dip into what's happening in this place. Vayash kef, gazing down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, right? This is Abraham now, and all of the land of the plain, Vayar, he saw that it was on fire, like the smoke of a kiln, right? That there was smoke coming up. And that is how that story ends. What do we make of it? I have no idea yet. Let's just take it and keep going, and we'll keep those pieces with us. Now we get into this piece about Sarah and Hagar and the jealousy, right? That's where our theme picks back up, which is with our word again. This is the feminine conjugation of the same verb, Vayera, Vayar, and it says Vayera. Right? And that t sound tells us that it's a woman who's doing it, rather the ya is a man, right? That's just the difference there. They sound like really different words, but we're paying attention. I'll show you some of the Hebrew in a few minutes. V'tereh Sarah et ben Hagar. Sarah sees the son of Hagar. Uh-oh. So somehow she is now seeing it, and it's, I don't know, she's taking it in. She's absorbing it. She's learning something. She's seeing something. She's, I don't know, she's going somewhere with it. Okay. And she's jealous and she says to Abraham, get him gone. I don't want him here anymore. And Abraham's like, okay. And he does, which is, by the way, like not his best quality. Okay. And then what happens? They're sent into the wilderness. They have very little food and water. They go through it really fast. And Hagar, and this is one of the verses, this is when I say that like sometimes you read things a million times and then your life changes and you look at it differently. Right. This is one of those places where like I never really noticed this verse until I had a kid. And then all of a sudden this verse like, rips my guts out, because what happens? Hagar goes and she sits down at a distance. The text says that she places her son under a bush, like for some shade. We imagine, I don't know, maybe it's hot, right? And she then she moves a little bit away and she says, I can't watch as he dies. Right? She says, al there's our same root. I can't look as this is happening. And then she bursts into tears. And whatever we make of that choice, right? I can't look, or I have to be there, or whatever. Like, we're not here to judge her as a mom. We are, but like that must be a terribly hard moment to be in. And then what happens? Vayifkach, which is a new word. We haven't seen that one before. I'm right here if you're following in my Hebrew. Vayifkach Elohim et eineha. We have seen that word. So God opens her eyes. Ain, that's the same as visa et einav, and God and he lifted his eyes. So God opens her eyes. V'tereh, and she sees that there's a well of water. Was it there before? Nobody knows, right? If God's opening eyes, God could probably also be making wells. I have no idea whether she could see that before. And what God is doing is saying, girl, you're tired and thirsty and scared. Maybe you missed this. Let me open your eyes to it. Or maybe God comes and saves Ishmael and says, I open your eyes to this thing that I just put here. It doesn't matter in our context. What we know is that she's not going to see it and she can't save her kid until God opens her eyes. Right? Because we know that like it's one of the things that I love about text also when I'm thinking about the words is, especially when we're talking about God and especially when we're talking about seeing, God often doesn't use like there's weird verb usage about God. So for example, the very first day of creation, right? There was chaos and it was dark and there was a wind of God that was floating over the deep. And then God said, let there be light. And it's the only time in the story of creation where God doesn't create a thing. God just speaks it. Let there be light. Right? The next thing that happens is that in the next day, right, God separates the water from the water. God gathers the water together to make sea and land. God creates, God separates, God gathers, God verbs. But in this case, when we're talking about the light, God just says, let it happen. Let there be light. Which is so interesting because especially in this context, right, the verb here is God opens her eyes and there was water, not, and God made water and she saw it. Yeah, a question. Hold on, you got to unmute. I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I took your, so there's something else that I see here is
Tell me.
that when Hagar is sitting down far from her son, she burst into tears. And so tears are water.
Yeah.
And then she opens her eyes and saw a well of water. It's the connection of the human with divine creation and our act of letting the water run that also opens up the well. So there's a magical and mystical moment of co-creation here is the way I see it also in
I
terms
love
of
it. I love it. That's beautiful, right? So what you are picking out is that, again, like the eyes the eyes here have, I don't know, some kind of meaning that we're looking for and finding. Are they up? Are they down? Are they crying? Are they not? Right? And all of that, I don't know, helps us to maybe see something or find something in it. Hard to say. I love it. Good spot. So what happens? She goes and she fills the skin with water. We're interested here in like God's role, in humans' role, in what does the looking mean? What do we have to learn from it? Okay. And the boy drinks and he's fine and he survives. Okay. And then now we get to the binding of Isaac, and we're almost through looking at these words. You guys have been very patient. I think this is, it's like tedious and cool at the same time to look at every single one of these. So what happens? Bayom hashlishi, right? God says, take your son, your only son, the one whom you love, and go and sacrifice him. Okay. He already was willing, by the way, to do a different kind of sacrifice with his other kid. So like Abe's not standing up here as like dad of the year because he is not doing a great job of protecting either of his children at this moment from damage, from harm, whether it be in the name of something divine or in the name of preserving his relationship with Sarah. But either way, like I have a lot of bones to pick with him. Fine. So now we get to he's on this, right, on this journey with Isaac. Abraham and Isaac set out for this place. And on the third day, Vayisa Avraham et Einav, Abraham lifted up his eyes. Vayar, and he saw et Hamakom, the place that they're supposed to go from afar. Okay, so we're doing the same thing again. Abraham is doing what he's supposed to do. He lifts up his eyes and he sees. Okay, now keep in mind that Abraham has only lifted up his own eyes. God has not lifted up his eyes. That was only God opening the eyes of Hagar, right? So when we got into that whole thing about the lifting and the opening, Hagar's eyes are opened by God. Abraham's eyes are lifted on his own. At least that's how the text reads. But because Hebrew is gendered, the text, the translation is pretty universal, that Abraham's the one that lifted up his eyes earlier, if we scroll back up, because it just says V'yisa Einav. It's just a he, right? We don't know who is lifting the eyes. But down here, it says V'yisa Avraham et Einav, and Abraham lifted his eyes. So we're pretty sure that God is not doing it. Fascinating to think about the cause and the intention and all of that. So Abraham lifts up his eyes and he sees the place that they're supposed to go. And now we're going to get to one of these places where like, ooh, it's so good. Hebrew and English have the same like expressions, right? We're going to use one of those things that is an expression that doesn't necessarily mean what the thing means. Let me say it and then I'll explain it. Vayomer Avraham Elohim, and Abraham said, and then the quotes start right before Elohim, Elohim Yireh Lo Haseh. God will see to the sheep, Le'olah, for the sacrifice, Beni, my son. God's going to handle this, but it's handle just the way that we would. God's going to see to this. I'm going to see to the problem later, right? We use that expression, right? But that's to see to is a really interesting expression that doesn't mean I'm going to do it. I'm going to handle it. I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to take responsibility for it. So it's interesting that that works in Hebrew and in English. I don't know if that's because of this turn of phrase. Like, I don't know which one is sourced from where, but Abraham says to Isaac, because Isaac doesn't know that he's about to, right, get the good stuff. We know that God says, that Abraham says God's going to take care of it. God's going to see to it. Okay, and the two of them go on together. We're almost done here. What happens? V'yisa Avraham et Einav. Abraham looked up, and this is when he's standing there, knife raised, Isaac bound to the altar, right? Vayisa Avraham et einav, and Abraham lifted up his eyes. Vayar, and he saw. Hine ayil, oh, a goat. What a great gift, right? There's a ram, there's a goat, there's a whatever it is. And what a great idea. He can take it and he can offer it up as a burnt offering instead of his own, I don't know, offspring, right? And then here's where we see it all get wrapped back up for us like a little gift that we are getting. And Abraham names this place Adonai Yireh. Adonai Yireh, which means on this mountain of God, there is vision. This is a place where there is vision. Right? That's crazy, because our story, which has a million different parts, starts and ends kind of with this same idea of vision and looking and seeing and whatever we're going to make of that. So let's just pause for a second. We've got 12 minutes left, and I'll run down to the same. I have to do services right after this, and I'll run. We've got 12 minutes left. What do you make of all of this looking and seeing and vision and that sort of thread that is running through this whole story? There's no right answer. I don't actually have an answer. So I just think it's cool. Anybody feel like they pulled anything through from that?
The first thing that I think of is I'm interested in what was happening perhaps historically when this parsha was written. And maybe was it important for the people who would have been hearing this, reading this, that they needed to have tangible evidence of God. So they needed to be able to see something in order for them to understand that Judaism was actually had the gravity, the authority. This was the religion to follow, because God was going to be there and you could actually see a tangible evidence of God, as opposed to maybe being pantheistic. So I'm just trying to think about what was the message that was being conveyed through the words.
I love it. Historical lens, right? What was this trying to accomplish? Beautiful. Richard.
This may have been the emphasis on the people or individuals bearing witness to events. The word ad is witness, and often there's reference to Edah later in Exodus as the congregation, the people. So this word of this actual witnessing of events was essential later for those who were in the desert to see what God is doing so that they would believe. And so this earlier the earlier use of Yireh is again that they need to know that this is really what's going on, and see it with their own eyes, as they later will in Shemot, to have to see things.
I'll just say, as a second piece of things that feel wildly relevant on November 4th, 2023, that we take out of Torah, that we are like, wow, I guess that's still pretty real, is this, right? Like with all of the chaos that is happening in Israel and the media inundation and the videos and the New York Times and the what this and that, the idea that like we can't really know unless we can see. And this wrestling with how to see what we can trust, and knowing that there is so much being talked about or shown that, right? And like, what's the difference between seeing it with your own eyes, right? To lift up your eyes and see it rather than any other variation of that. And it's a very different context with a very different outcome. And yet that sort of underlying human nature truth is still so real that for us, it's different when we can see it. and when we know it rather than any other alternative. It's so interesting to me when these things just stay, right, universally relevant to us in such different context. Good, thank you. That's beautiful. So far we have what was the purpose of this, and then maybe as a little bit of a suggestion, but also as one that is about God, right? That's about the holiness and the people and the monotheism and the establishment of a community, that the witnessing feels like such a relevant part of that has to be able to be transmitted, that we are and were witnesses, that Abraham is sort of doing all of this and seeing it and witnessing it. Good. Any other, I don't know, ideas, thoughts?
I'm going to jump in, please. I'm
Yes.
Sue. Hi, or Shalom in Grand Junction, although I live closer to Telluride. I just wanted to thank you because your presentation, you just exude enthusiasm for Judaism. I looked at your background. You have an amazing background.
Hey, but did you know that when I was a second year rabbinical student, my student pulpit was Grand Junction?
Ah,
Oh, wow.
you know Pauline Gorman then.
I sure do. Tell her I said hi.
Yeah, I'm her co-student rabbi sponsor.
I love it.
Or Shalom. That is good to know, and I'm not surprised at all. But I just, you give me hope for the future.
Oh,
I mean, you make Judaism exciting, yeah, while being informative, creative, and you're exactly what I needed today in the world such as it is today. So I just wanted to thank you personally because I have just been glued. Thank you.
I know. Me too. Well, thank you. So let's pull on that, right? Because I think that's actually like kind of the point of what we're talking about, is that we are impacted by what we experience and by what we see. We need different things at different moments, and to really just float from that. And if you have other things, we can come back and we can pull them in. But I'm going to reshare my screen, and I'm just going to like dig in a little bit even nerdier to some of the words here. Right? And he saw, which is the name of our parsha. This is the tiniest chart. Don't even worry about it. It doesn't matter. I just wanted to show you that I'm not making this up. I'm kidding. He saw, the root is resh. That's this letter, aleph, and hey. So there's 3 letters in every root. This is the root of the word to see or to look, or however we're using. And just for fun, for a second, just to zoom in so that you can see the chaos of Hebrew grammar, right? All this is, it's a conjugation table of this particular verb that says like, okay, if I'm going to do it in first person future tense, here's how it looks. Or, the imperative is that, whatever. It's not important for us. It's just interesting to see. But Vayera, Yara, right? All of these, you start to feel the pattern of like the different sounds that come in, the vowel sounds, right? Like tere, yir-ah. Those are all signals in Hebrew grammar that help us understand who's talking and who they're talking to, who's looking, right? And right, those are cues that we get. But one of the really good things about like the chaos of the Hebrew and the roots and what you do with them is that there's a lot of words that sound alike. And again, just to clarify, I never believe that this is an intentional mishmash that's giving us secret information. Never. But I do believe that these similarities and these connections give us lenses. And sometimes it's a lens we need. And so there's a word that is just like this. The word for fear is yirah. And it has a lot of the same letters, right? The yud, this first letter, and the hey are letters that are very, very, very active in conjugation. So they show up in all kinds of verbs, even when they're not part of the root. So what we've really got is the resh and the aleph, those 2 letters, the and the ah, and everything else changes depending on how we're conjugating. And so a lot of the words that we use for fear are words that sound very much like words that we use for vision, which is pretty weird and interesting. So I'll give you an example, right? At the end of Adon Olam, which is a prayer that we,
Lo Yireh.
there we go, from the Psalms that it's a piece of one of the Psalms that we say all the time, especially on Shabbat. The very end of it, we say, Adonai li velo ira, right? God is with me, I shall not fear. And we hear all the time in Torah, right? God says to Moses says to the people, Moses says to Joshua, and especially when we're talking about God, al tira, don't be afraid, right? Or lo ira, the same conjugation of that, right? Or lo yireh, don't fear this thing. And one of the craziest parts of this is that it actually isn't just fear. So I've given you this translation, and here's the wacky conjugation that we're not going to look at, but that just has all the same letters, but in different orders. One of the ideas here is that actually we are often motivated by an idea of Yirat Adonai, which is the fear of God. But that's not a particularly Jewish idea. And actually, maybe it's not fear, maybe it's awe. And that is one of these ideas that comes up all the time on our high holidays, because you might remember, if you have participated in like Yom Kippur services before, we call those our yamim, our days,
Norim.
noraim, of awe. It's the same, norah is the same root as yira, which is fear, because fear and awe are sort of interchangeable. Those are not days of fear, right? They're days of, like, I don't know, hunger, and I work a lot, but like they're big days. They're important days. They're not days of I'm afraid. They're days of, oh, this is where I feel God is the most here, or where, I don't know, I'm the most accountable. And so now we have this whole parsha and this whole start of the life of Abraham, and where is he going to go, and what's he going to do, and how is he going to kick off the creation of our people. And it's all about what Abraham is seeing. And boy, that must be pretty overwhelming if you're Abraham, because being the first to do anything, you have no idea if you're doing a thing that is good or right or crazy and wrong. And it feels big, and God's showing up all the time and talking to him and making 90-year-old women pregnant and destroying cities, right? And telling you to, like, sacrifice your son, don't sacrifice your son, go to the land that I'm going to show you, but like, it's going to be a wild ride. What a way to kick off, right? The beginning of the Jewish people with all of this uncertainty. And so, number one, in times of uncertainty, what do? We lift our eyes and just look. We just see and notice what's around us, because we feel unrooted and untethered, and looking and seeing, thank God, gives us grounding in reality rather than what is spinning in our minds. And when we feel wandering and unrooted and untethered, what do? We look, and perhaps what we see feels big. And perhaps what we see when we pay attention and when we notice what's in the world feels overwhelming. That was true, I have to believe, for Abraham. And I think it's pretty true for us, right? We are in week 3 of war in Israel. I imagine, I don't want to put any experience in anybody else's mind. I know that for me, this has been a 3-week period unlike any other in my life, not just in my role as a rabbi. And I rabbied through COVID, right? So I did a little bit of stuff here, not too much, but I'm getting there. This feels different. It feels big, and it feels scary. And we lift our eyes and we see, and what we see isn't always 100% comforting. But sometimes it is real, and it's honest, and it's necessary for us to know what we're supposed to do with it. And so I just want to say that maybe some of the answer here and some of what we get to learn from this Torah portion is that in times of uncertainty, which I think we're in, and in times of certainty, maybe also, one of our jobs is to be able to move from perception to fear, to awe, to perception again, right? That we should never get out of that cycle. And one of the things that we might think about is, where are the spaces where we get to do that? And so this last thing that I'll share with you before we go is the prayer that we say every morning upon waking up. We say, Modeh ani lefanecha. This is just gratitude, right? Modeh is the same root as todah, if you've ever heard that, the Hebrew word for thank you. Modeh ani lefanecha. I'm so grateful before you, God, who is, right, the God of all that exists, that has returned my soul to me with the compassion of great loyalty and relationship, right? We have this idea that when we go to sleep, our soul goes and gets dry cleaned overnight so that we get it back like very nice and pressed and ready for another day. And so God gives us our soul back every morning. How great. Today I got it back again because here I am waking up. And so I say Modeh ani, but then there's another verse that we don't always sing because it doesn't, I don't know, have the nice tune. And it says, Reshit chochma yirat Adonai. Reshit, bereshit, rosh, the head, the beginning of chokhmah, of wisdom, right? Remember the 4 children from Passover? One is a hacham, chokhmah, the wisdom, the smarts. Yirat Adonai is, I don't know, the blank of God. And so maybe when we think about, okay, it's a new day, we're waking up, we're starting over, what's it going to be? What are we going to do? How are we going to show up today? What's the world going to be? The beginning of our understanding of that is Yirat Adonai. Technically, it translates to that fear or awe word here, but I'm going to take a little liberty of what we've learned today and say that maybe what it actually is telling us in this moment is that it's also just looking. Right? We've woken up in a time that feels, I don't know, big. And so the first thing we have to do is exactly what Abraham does in this Torah portion, and lift up our eyes and just look and just see. And if we don't lift up our eyes, we don't notice, we don't create connection, we don't have any community because we're looking down, right? And that was our first idea. And it's okay if when we're looking up, we're crying. I don't think that that is a bad part of what it means to be a human today. I think it's probably a pretty necessary part, right? But we look up and we connect and we see what it is. And only then, that's the beginning of our understanding and wisdom. Only then can we figure out what we're going to do about it. So I don't know. I've never read the Parsha this way before, but today it felt like the way. What a pleasure to learn with all of you and to spend this time and to be with you. I really appreciate and enjoy all of you. Thank you. And thank you for your insight and wisdom.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi
you.
Hyatt.
Thank you very much.
Thank
What a
Your
you.
gift.
approach is one I really like.
A pleasure. I'm going to run like heck down to the sanctuary so that I am not late for services. But
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
Shalom, everyone, and be well.
Shalom.
Thank you for
Rabbi,
being
so
with
thank
us.
you so
everybody.
much.
Bye-bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here this morning. You're welcome to sit and chat if you want to just visit for a few minutes or whatever. Happy to see you all. Hope everybody's doing well.
This was just amazing. This was so enlightening.
Yeah.
You know, I look to the mountains, whence comes my help, and yet sometimes what we see is not really true. We think we're looking on something. For example, this may not be good to bring up, but in the war, people say, I saw this, and yet it may not be true. Israel says, no, it was like this. So the sight and the vision and looking down, looking up, it's just a wonderful, she gave us so much to think about just with seeing. I just love this today.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things I wondered about when she was talking about, like, at the end about we should just see, I want it to cross my mind. They're not talking about like being mindful. I mean, was God, I mean, is that I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I don't know.
Thank you.
I like that, Sherry. Mindfulness. Is that the same as seeing? Because what you see, you become mindful of. Those play a big part in each other.
Yeah, there's a word, Hebrew word for that. Escaping me right now. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But that word mindfulness, and I'm trying to remember it so I could see if I could see a root in it. But sorry.
That's okay.
Maybe I can find it here.
Sherry,
Yes.
I would like to share the video once you've got it posted with the rabbi that we have here.
Absolutely.
Just to have her take a look at it. Very, very interesting. Bright lady.
Absolutely. She was fantastic. Yeah, actually, I should stop the recording now.